Hello everyone, and welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor, and this is episode 138. So tonight we are going to talk about why we hold on to hurt, and we're going to get into some shadow work. We're going to talk a little bit more about what shadow work is and why it's so scary. We're going to build up to that. So I received a session from a new practitioner I didn't know, and as she was working on me, she said something to me about how she felt that I had a lot of wounding in my heart, and that this wounding was kind of holding me back from moving into what was next, or from really stepping more fully into my calling. And so as I do, I was kind of sitting with that afterwards and thinking about it. And it came to me, instead of the word wounding, it came to me just as hurt. And so I started thinking about this. If I have this hurt, if I'm holding on to this hurt, why am I holding on to this hurt? Like, what are the reasons that I would hold on to hurt? Because it's painful. Why would I want to keep it around? Why wouldn't I choose to release that from my frequency, from my body? We talk on the show all the time about trauma release. Why would I choose to hold on to some of my trauma, essentially? Because what is hurt? I mean, trauma is hurt. It's when you're hurt by a person or a situation. And really, there are these micro hurts that we have every single day. And a lot of us are holding on to those. And I think not knowing that we're holding on to them and not realizing why. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So I was kind of sitting with this and thinking, well, why would I hold on to hurt? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And there was part of me that was like, meh, but whenever I get that kind of meh feeling, it's like, oh, there's probably something, it's time to do the excavation, right? There's probably something underneath that, because otherwise I would, it's a trigger response. Whenever you get that like feeling like something's off, or a strong feeling like, I don't want to look at that, that's a triggered response. So I kind of recognized like, oh yeah, maybe, there's some truth to this. There's something I should look at more deeply. So this is not an exhaustive list of why we hold on to hurt. This is just kind of where my mind went. And so we're going to talk about kind of 3 different reasons why we might be holding on to hurt. And they're not mutually exclusive. It could be, you could have one or all of these for any given hurt, for any given situation. And I think the first one, and kind of the most obvious, which is funny because it's a little bit of an oxymoron that it's obvious, is denial. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to see this. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to admit that I'm hurt. Sometimes hurt is masked by other feelings like anger or depression. So it's like, I don't want to acknowledge that I was hurt in this situation. It's easier to be angry about it, or it's easier to just kind of feel like I'm giving up and I'm in despair because I don't have to feel the depth of the hurt. It's a little more of it's a mask. Essentially, it's kind of like a Band-Aid. And the story that kind of came to my mind actually right before the show when I was thinking about this was my experience with my first encounter with crystal bowls in 2019 when I mentioned Trish Devney on the show all the time. I consider her to be my mentor. She's an amazing sound practitioner. And I first heard her play at this women's conference I went to here in Tucson in 2019. And she played twice. She played once at the beginning of the conference and once at the end. And what happened to me, again, I can explain now with a little more hindsight, and during the process I was a little bit like, I don't know what's happening to me. But I had this history, which I've talked about many times on the show, of recurrent pregnancy loss, infertility and recurrent pregnancy loss. At this point, I've had 12 miscarriages. At that point, it was more like maybe 8 to 10, somewhere in there. Still way too many miscarriages for one person to have to go through. And what I realize now, talking about this in hindsight, is that I was really in denial about the depth of the hurt. I mean, I knew how horrible it was, but at a certain point it was like, I'm grieving, I've done the grieving, I'm not trying to get pregnant anymore, I'm just trying to move on with my life. And I would have told you like, oh, I'm over that. That's another little bit of a trigger one, like, oh yeah, I'm over that, it's fine. Yeah, maybe a sign that it's not really fine. And essentially I think what had happened, and we do this to cope. First of all, there's absolutely no blame about this. It's completely understandable why we end up in denial, because I didn't know what else to do with it. I didn't have the tools to really recover. So what was really happening was that I had kind of just slapped a Band-Aid over it or kind of stitched it up, but the wound itself wasn't healing. It was kind of festering under the surface, and there was still all of this hurt in there. And so when I heard Trish play the first time, it felt like something in my kind of sacral root chakra area, in that lower kind of pelvic part of my body, was being ripped open. And looking back after I kind of processed and figured out what had happened, it was those stitches being ripped apart. It was that Band-Aid being ripped off. It was that denial being removed. And we're going to use sound for hurt tonight because it's so great, because it brought the awareness, the light, it shone the light onto my denial, but then it also helped me truly heal, which is one of the reasons I love sound. It has all of these facets. So I heard her play her bowls, and it ripped apart that stitching, and all of a sudden this festering wound was exposed, and it was like I was just a hot mess for the rest of the conference, and I was just crying, and I didn't know why I was crying, and I kept apologizing to people because I couldn't have a conversation, would just instantly start crying, and I really had no idea what was going on. I was really like, I don't understand what is happening here. And by the last day, I had kind of figured it out a little bit. I'm not sure I had the words for it, but I had figured out that, something had been ripped open around this infertility and these pregnancy losses. And I was like, oh, I thought I was over that. It was like the denial was exposed. So the sound did that for me. But the sound also started the actual healing process. So I had this festering wound, it was kind of like all the pus and the gross stuff was coming out. That would, I was just crying. I didn't know what was going on. And then Trish played again at the end of the conference. And I actually felt that wound start to heal. I felt, to keep using that analogy, like the tissue begin to knit, begin to grow back together. So instead of having this denial Band-Aid popped over the top of it and this festering wound underneath that was causing all sorts of problems that I couldn't see, I didn't even know that was happening because I didn't have the tools. I wasn't ready to see it. The sound, first of all, exposed it, and then all the infectious garbage kind of came out. And then when she played again, the sound actually began to heal me, truly heal me. That festering kind of mess of emotional hurt and pain began to grow back together. It began to fully knit as a healed area. If you ever wonder why I'm so attached to sound, it's been 4 years and it's bringing me to tears, that experience. So sound is one of the most powerful ways to heal. Anyway, that was not the point of my story, and I may have told that story before in a different context. So I had this denial, the Band-Aid was ripped off, the yucky stuff came out, and then it began to finally actually heal. So it was like the denial was such that I couldn't even tell that there was this festering hurt that was still in me because I didn't know what to do with it. But here's the thing, even after you organically heal a hurt, there can be a scar left over. I've had 3 surgeries in the last 10 years and my belly is all covered with scars now. So the other thing about this is we can heal hurt at a deep level. We can let it go. I have truly believed that I have let go of most of that hurt, but the little bit of scar tissue does remain, and being aware of that can be helpful so that when you do get triggered about that, it's like, oh, yep, there's that little scar of hurt again that I have to deal with. But instead of this giant festering wound that's just could be, causing sepsis, to keep going with my medical analogy, instead it's healed and there's just a little bit of a reminder there that something really painful happened. So number one reason why we choose, maybe not consciously or intentionally, to hold on to hurt is denial. We're just not ready to deal with it. We're not ready to look at it. It feels too big. So then the second thing I thought of when I was thinking about this topic was this idea that we hold on to hurt sometimes because we think we're taking care of someone else. So essentially, a lot of us were raised with this belief that our job was to preserve someone else's comfort, even at the cost of our own. So it doesn't matter if you're in great discomfort or you're in great hurt, as long as the other person isn't. And some of the words for this might be things like people pleasing or codependence. So this idea, especially if you were raised in a traumatic environment, and I'm going to speak about this from my knowledge and experience, but this goes for many different traumatic experiences, but I was raised in an alcoholic home. And so the family dynamics of addiction are that you will do anything to keep the addict happy and calm. Same thing for abuse. You have to do anything you can, sometimes to preserve your own safety, your own life physically. So you're taught from a very early age to sacrifice your own comfort for someone else so that someone else can be more comfortable. And what that looks like energetically, emotionally, is that a lot of times you'll take somebody else's hurt on. It's not necessarily even your hurt, but because you don't want them to hurt, it's like, I will take it, give it to me, I can hold it. And so sometimes we think we're actually doing a service for someone by holding on to this hurt because we feel that we have the capacity. And usually that is a very early program that is kind of created in us in the family dynamic, but you can see it culturally too. I was watching a TikTok, and I keep pointing it out to my husband now every time we see it. I was watching this woman and she was talking about how men, and specifically white men, will not move out of the way for a woman. And I never really thought about it before. And everywhere I've gone since then, I'm walking down the aisle of the store. Nope, they will not move. They expect you to move. And again, it's a culturally programmed thing. It's not a conscious thing for either of us. And this person in the TikTok was talking about how she won't move anymore, and they will actually run right into her because they are expecting all the way to the last minute that she's going to get out of the way and cede the right of way essentially to them. So that is kind of a cultural programming example of this idea that I will put myself out for you. I will sacrifice my own comfort by moving out of the way so that you can be comfortable. And that's not conscious usually. And so that is kind of one of those programs that we have to start recognizing and then addressing as it comes up. So that's another reason that we hold on to hurt, is like, I took all this hurt on so someone else wouldn't be hurt. And now, again, it's just like festering in me. And then the denial comes in because it's like, well, if I look at this, I've got to look at my own behaviors too. One of the things I just mentioned, Trish Devney, she posted a really interesting post in Sound Shifting. That's her group on Facebook, about kind of the practice of sound and the idea that sound is really powerful and that you can actually hurt someone with sound. And most of us have been in a situation, I've been in a sound bath where it was physically hurting me, and I didn't leave because I didn't want to be rude. Same thing with yoga. I've been in lots of yoga classes where I was like physically hurting myself, but I didn't have the courage to kind of stand up and say, I can't do this, I've just got to go. And she was talking about how it's actually our responsibility. You could blame the practitioner who is maybe using sound too loudly, let's say, or using too many cacophonous sounds and kind of actually creating less harmony in the body. But ultimately, as the receiver, it's really your responsibility to take care of yourself. And that is a perfect example, again, of that idea of, I don't want to offend somebody. I don't want to make them uncomfortable. So I'm going to allow myself to be hurt so that I don't hurt them. And that takes, I recognize that in myself a lot now, but it's a long process to trying to reprogram to the point where you can actually act on that, where you can let go of that programming about, I am going to allow myself to be hurt because I'd rather hurt myself than hurt you, or I'd rather have myself be hurt than think about hurting you. And it's hard because it feels like it's the right thing to do. Like, oh, I'm a good person, I don't want to hurt you. But then why would you let yourself be hurt? And not that the other person's not a good person. Again, most of the time this stuff is like unconscious or unintentional. And I'm very sensitive to sound. So my tolerance might be much lower than someone else. So it really is on me to stand up in a situation like that one that I'm using and say, I'm sorry, this is just too much for me. I have to go. And then assume that the practitioner is going to take care of themselves and not take that personally. It's one of the things I always tell people in my sound journeys. If you need to take care of yourself, if you need to leave, you will not offend me. If you need to walk out of the room, you will not offend me. Take care of yourself. And part of the reason I'm so passionate about that is because I have such a hard time taking care of myself. So that's kind of the second reason that we hold on to hurt, because we're trying to avoid hurting someone else. So now we've built our way into the really uncomfortable one, and this is the one that I really had to sit with for a while. And this is kind of the crux of this topic. I'm stalling. I do that sometimes when I don't want to talk about something. So really briefly, I mentioned shadow work. Let me explain what that is, because this is a good example of that. I mean, all of this is a little bit of shadow work, but what is shadow work? So shadow work is essentially working with the parts of ourselves that we don't want to see. We want to assume that we're good people, and most of us are trying to be. And of course, we're not perfect, but there are aspects of ourselves that we don't want to see. We don't want to think about, I might be capable of hurting someone's feelings so that I preserve my own self, so that I preserve my own comfort. I may make someone else uncomfortable. There's this idea, maybe I'm not a good person if I do that. So that's this idea of shadow work and we do a lot of that on the show. I just don't necessarily use that terminology. But in this case, it's extremely helpful to understand how challenging shadow work can be, because it essentially forces you to look at parts of yourself you don't want to admit exist. The parts of yourself that you're like, oh, if I'm really doing that, maybe I'm not a good person, or maybe I'm not as good of a person as I thought I was, or maybe, it brings up all these thoughts and it kind of challenges our self-worth and our self-identity. And, a lot of times too, it's a reaction to, I don't want to be anything like so-and-so. So then you don't want to see that you got a lot of the same qualities as so-and-so, because we all have all of the qualities. We all have the capacity for great light and great darkness. And if we won't acknowledge the darkness, we talked about toxic positivity, I think a few weeks in a row now. If we can't acknowledge our darkness, we don't have balance. We need to have balance. And the darkness, if we're not acknowledging it, what happens? We just talked about denial and festering. So if you don't acknowledge those darker aspects, they tend to actually get worse. So one of the reasons we do shadow work is to look at those things and allow ourselves some grace. So remember that when I'm talking about this next step here. I actually made notes for the first time in like 2 years tonight, because I was like afraid I was gonna like chicken out about talking about this. So I think one of the reasons, and this might be one of the biggest reasons that we have a hard time letting go of hurt, one of the reasons we're holding on to hurt, is that we're waiting for justice. I'm going to say that in quotes, quote unquote, justice. What does that mean? So I think it can vary a lot, but when we're hurt, generally we're hurt by something, right? Or we're hurt by someone. A lot of times it's a someone. So I think one of the reasons that we actually hold on to hurt, and this is what I found when I was kind of excavating within myself, was this idea that sometimes we're waiting for the other party to admit or realize or acknowledge, or all three, what they did and the fact that it hurt us. And even darker than that, deeper than that, scarier to admit than that, sometimes we're holding on to our hurt because we're waiting to see if that other person is going to get what they deserve. And when I thought about that, it made me really, really, really uncomfortable. But I instantly recognized, oh crap, that is this hurt that I'm holding on to. And then it got me thinking about stories. What is the story that you're telling yourself to justify holding on to that hurt? And stories are great. I tell stories all the time on the show. But stories can actually keep us stuck in a certain way of thinking. They can definitely keep us stuck in a certain way of being. And so what happens here, I'm going to use an example, and And like right away I thought, maybe this person is going to know who they are. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So when I was in high school, I was bullied by a boy pretty badly. And I realized this is a good example of this, it's been almost 30 years since I've been out of high school, 25 years, and I am still holding on to this hurt because there is a part of me that wants this person to know how badly they hurt me and how much their actions really affected me and really stunted me and really forced me to dim my light. This was an experience of me being in a position of authority, and this person just could not take it, and they kept challenging me and bullying me, and it finally led to this big confrontation where this person cornered me in the hall and he said to me, "You better never talk to me like that again." And I was literally put in charge of the class while the teacher was gone. That was my job. I was doing like basically an apprenticeship. And it was like, this person was kind of messing around and pushing me and had been for several years. And I finally just was like, "Look, do you want to come up here and do this? This is not easy. So either shut up or you take over and I'm leaving." Like, I was mad, and it takes a lot to push me to that point. So after the class, this person cornered me and just gave it to me and yelled and yelled and yelled. And I already was really struggling with, I was not comfortable. I had physically lost my voice, which I've talked about. That was a time in my life I'd physically lost my voice. I didn't want to be seen. I had already a lot of disordered eating patterns, trying to keep myself small, trying to get small. And there was this one area in my life where I was allowed to, I felt, be a little bit of the leader that I was meant to be. And then here this person came and just destroyed me for it. And years and years and years and years later, I don't think about this person very much. Like, I don't want to give them that much power. But when I look inside my energetic container, which is my body, which is where the hurt is stored, and I started thinking about this, why am I holding on to hurt? What is the hurt I'm holding on to? And of course, the first thing was like, oh, the infertility. Like, no, I really have let that go. It's in a state of kind of scarification. When I started thinking about this and looking at this, it was all these little experiences like that one I just mentioned that I'm still holding on to in my body, because there's part of me that is like, man, that freaking guy, like, I wish he got what's coming to him, or at least he, like, maybe someday he'll apologize to me. Like, what good would that do at this point? It's a really good example of how, if you think about 100 little things like that festering inside of you, why? It's this idea that people talk about too, about when you forgive someone, you're not forgiving them for them. You're doing it for yourself, because you're hurting yourself by holding on to that hurt, by letting it fester, by letting it kind of bubble and boil, and it's doing things physically in your body. I've talked many, many times about the issues I've had with my belly, which are finally getting better, and could be a whole nother show someday. But one of the things is that as I do some of this physical healing, the energetic stuff comes up, and it's like, oh, what have I been holding on to in here? All of these little hurts. And it turns into this story, right? I just told you the story. Oh, I was bullied in high school and I overcame it and I've reclaimed my light and blah, blah, blah. Like, is it helpful for me to keep holding on to that story if I'm also holding on to the hurt that started it all? No, it's not. Is it helpful for me to walk around with that hurt festering inside of me with this vain little hope that someday, maybe this person will understand how much they hurt me and they will apologize? Absolutely not. I mean, again, it's funny because I haven't thought about that. It's not something I think about a lot. But when I started excavating this hurt, it's one of the first things that came up. And I was like, oh my gosh, really? Like, yeah, that was kind of a formative thing. And it definitely didn't help me at the time with the whole dimming my light thing. But like, again, it was 25 plus years ago. I am not that person anymore. And if I had that event happen to me now, I like to think I would have just got right back up in that person's face and told them what to do with themselves. Maybe not, because again, still programmed to put other people's comfort ahead of my own. But I'm working on that and I'm seeing it. And that is the whole point of this. We cannot change what we cannot see. We cannot let go of something that we won't even acknowledge. And it was really hard for me to admit, because I really want to think of myself as this loving person. I'm a loving person. I'm a forgiving person. I'm in this flow. And yes, I am. That's all true. But also, I'm a person who's been holding on to a lot of hurt. And I think we all are. I think it's whether we admit it or not, unless you're doing this trauma work, a lot of people don't ever even see that stuff. And it's just, again, festering under the surface and absolutely informing the way that you behave in life. I talked about, moving out of people's way. I still can't do it. I still keep walking down the aisle, and then at the last minute I move and I'm like, one of these days I'm just going to see what happens. They're going to mow me down with their cart is probably what's going to happen. But awareness, acknowledgement, recognition of this is the first step to letting it go. And why would I keep holding on to something that is physically, energetically, and emotionally still hurting me? I don't need that. I don't need that baggage. It's a little bit like decluttering. Why am I holding on to, I don't know, an award I won in high school 25 years ago? Maybe they're related. I just got rid of a whole bunch of stuff and it was kind of hard to do, but then I haven't really thought about it since. And I think that's a little bit how this work is. When you dredge it back up, it's like, oh yeah, that was a really uncomfortable situation. But then it's kind of like, why is this even still in here? I am a powerful being. I have done so much amazing stuff since then. Why? Why am I carrying that around? Why am I still telling myself that story? Oh yeah, I was bullied and oh, it was really terrible and that person was awful and it made me, feel like I needed to be small. I don't need to hold that anymore. And I think the more work you do around this, the more bravery you have, because it's hard. I don't want to admit that I want revenge on someone. I don't know if vengeance, those are maybe a little too powerful of words, but at least I think a lot of times that idea that you want somebody to admit that they did hurt you and how much they hurt you, and especially if it's an abuser, you want that person to understand the damage that they did. And chances are most of them never will. And it's not your job. It's not your job to help them, because if they actually realized how much they were hurting someone else, they would have to reckon with all of that inside themselves, just like I'm reckoning with this stuff inside myself. So why? It's not serving us. It's not serving them. And if we can see it, then we have the opportunity to start that healing process. We can rip off that band-aid. We can rip off the band-aid. I can't talk. We can allow the wound to fester a little bit, get back into that of it, air it out, irrigate it up, and then really let it knit back together, really let it heal fully. Even if it leaves a scar, I'd rather have these 5 scars on my belly than the pain and misery I was suffering before I had the surgery. The surgery was worth it, even though it left me with scars. That is a good way to look at this. You can't get rid of the hurt. It already happened. But if you can work through it now and let it go, even if it leaves a scar, the pain is no longer the same. The pain is decreased or maybe even gone. And that opens up so much beautiful flow of energy. So for tonight's meditation, we're going to work on this a little bit, recognizing the hurt, releasing the hurt. Be gentle with this. Start with something really easy. If a really big thing comes to your mind right away and you're ready for it, go for it. But if you're not, reach out for help one-on-one. We're talking about trauma here. It can be really overwhelming. But one of the things we're going to do is recognize where in the body are you storing the hurt. And it can be multiple places, but a lot of people store hurt in that belly. I call it the cave. And I work with people all the time, solar plexus, sacral chakra area. And I'll ask people, how does it feel in your cave? And they'll say, I don't know, or I don't feel anything. That's because we're disconnected from that area of the body because we don't want to feel all that hurt, because we shoved it all down there and we don't want to look at it. We don't want to feel it again. Of course, we don't want to feel it again. And then we're completely disconnected from the actual physical, energetic powerhouse of our body, which is that Hara Dantian womb space area. If we're not connected to that area in our body, we're not connected to our source of power in this physical realm and our source of creativity. So absolutely, it's hard to look at the hurt, but once you start doing it and you get reconnected, you realize underneath those boulders of hurt, as one of my clients called them, my cave is full of boulders. Underneath those boulders is this beautiful, amazing, magical cave filled with wonder and joy and delight. And you deserve to access that. You deserve to experience that. And if it requires a little bit of discomfort and working through and pulling those boulders of hurt up and throwing them away and letting that healing happen, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it, but it's hard. It's hard to look at those parts of ourselves that we maybe didn't want to acknowledge. And that's partly why we do this work. It's why I call it excavation. And so let's do a little bit of that in the meditation tonight. We're going to use, of course, some sound, because as I mentioned, sound can help with the awareness and it can help with the healing. And it's so effortless. Yes, this requires effort. You got to see it. You got to recognize it. You got to do the work of that kind of heavy emotional lifting. But why not let something else come in to make it feel a little bit less heavy, to make it feel a little bit easier, to allow it to happen in a way that can really feel magical, that can bring the rain shower when no one else in around town has any rain, like on our sound journey last night. So let's meditate together. So for this meditation, choose a position that feels safe. If you want to sit up, make sure that you're supported in some way, that you're reasonably comfortable. Lying down is a great way to do this one. Maybe prop your knees up. You want to have some access to your body with your hands if you can, but it doesn't matter if you're upright or lying down for this one. Just trust your intuition. So let's start, as we almost always do, with 3 to 5 deep oxytocin breaths. You can also include a little bit of gentle movement here. I'm just moving my neck back and forth, and I'm actually kind of pointing my toes a little bit, just moving some stuck energy through the body with both the breath and a little bit of gentle movement. So for that oxytocin breath, you're going to take a nice deep breath in through the nose. We're going to sigh that out with an audible ha sound, starting high and ending low, vibrating the vagus nerve, telling the body that we're safe. And do that a few more times. Even with my very first breath and a little bit of movement, I notice a difference in my body. I notice a release of some of the tension, especially in my belly. We're going to pay special attention to the heart space in the belly tonight. So take one more of those deep breaths and just focus on your body. Focus on your torso, on your belly, on your heart. Just notice how you're feeling in that area as you breathe. And as you sigh it out, just set the intention to release anything that's not serving you. Maybe let go of a little bit of tension here. You can continue with some gentle movement if that feels good. Moving my legs and my hips a little bit. You can do some gentle torso circles. For all of this movement, you want to be really gentle. Go to just 20 or 30% of your capacity. This isn't for stretching. We're just moving the body to move some energy here. stirring some things up, perhaps literally doing these torso rotations is a good way to stir up some energy. And then as you feel ready, let yourself come still. Maybe take one more deep breath if you like, or just let your breath relax. At any point during this meditation, you can always go back to those oxytocin breaths. If you've got some emotion coming up, let that come and then take some nice deep breaths. If you need to walk away from this, absolutely, you can do that. You can always come back to it. It's not going anywhere. So to begin, just start thinking for a moment about hurt. And ask your body, where am I holding hurt in my body? And then listen, and your body will answer. And you might know right away. Might be one area, might be both. Might be in the heart space or the belly. It might be in your joints. Could be in the head or the mind space and the muscles. Just allow that answer to come intuitively. You can ask it a couple different times. Where am I holding hurt in my body? And when you have a sense of that, place your hands on that area. And if you're getting multiple areas, just pick the one that feels the most powerful, or maybe the one that came to you first. You could always put one hand in one place, one hand in another. If it's something like a joint or an area that's not easy to reach, you can also just hold your hand kind of out in front of you and point it toward that area. So if it's my right shoulder and I can't comfortably reach my right shoulder, I might just hold my left hand in front of me and kind of point it, my left shoulder. Same thing for your feet. You can just point a hand down. Just drawing awareness there, directing energy there. You might feel your hands heating up or tingling. If not, that's fine. There's no rules about that. There's no pressure here. And let yourself just notice. So this is where I'm holding hurt. What does the hurt feel like? Physically in my body, what does this hurt feel like? Does it feel like an ache or a pain? Does it feel like a fullness or a heaviness? Does it feel like a tightness or a constriction? Just notice. Let go of any judgments that come up. Just noticing where you're holding this hurt. What does it feel like in your body? And if you'd like to notice any more specifics about this hurt here, you can, but it's not necessary. So if a scenario comes into your mind right away, let it come up, just kind of look at it, know that you're not in that space anymore. You can watch it almost like you're watching a movie, just being a little bit detached. And if you're just working with the hurt in general, just keep your hands on this hurt. I'm going to assist you here with some Reiki, with some DFE energy through this transmission. Just bringing awareness to this area actually begins the process of healing. It can begin a little bit of movement if we're in this stagnation or holding. It can bring a little bit of expansion if you're in a constriction. It can bring a little bit of ease if you're in discomfort or pain. So if there's a specific scenario that's come up, just set the intention to let that go. You might use an affirmation and even say it out loud. I no longer hold on to this hurt. I no longer tell myself the story of this hurt. I am willing to release this hurt. Or if you're not there yet, you might even just say, I'm willing to think about releasing this hurt. And if you have any thoughts coming up about this idea of justice or wanting the other party or parties in this scenario to acknowledge what they did to you, or to apologize, or to maybe get what they've got coming to them, it's okay. Release judgments about that. That's not going to serve anyone. but also recognize that those thoughts and feelings aren't serving you or that person. So again, maybe just set the intention here that you're willing to think about letting go of that. I'm willing to think about letting go of holding this person responsible for the actions that caused me hurt. It doesn't mean that they're not responsible. It just means you're not going to hold that responsibility anymore. It's their responsibility. You don't need to hold on to that. You don't need to hold on to the hurt anymore. You can come back and repeat this as many times as you'd like. And each time you might find that you're getting in a little deeper to that scenario, you're a little more willing to release. You might also find that you've got a feeling of release, that you're letting go of that hurt, that it's moving through. So if you're in that space, if you're not, that's fine. But if you're in that space, take some nice deep breaths. You might even feel your hands start to move. You can begin to brush that hurt out of your system, brushing it out of the body, just like you're using your hands a little bit like a broom. Whatever kind of rhythm feels good to you here. You don't have to use your hands, but it can be really helpful to encourage the energy to move. You can do this all in your mind. You can brush down along the sides of your body, wherever you're at. If you're in a place where you can't reach that part of the body, just focus your intention on that part of the body and then do the sweeping wherever you'd like. And again, you don't have to use your hands, but it can be really helpful. Lightening this load. You can think almost like you're making yourself a frothy drink, a frothy coffee or a tea or a cocoa, and all of this heavy milk, this heavy cream of hurt is just frothing up. It's just lightening up. And as it lights up, you could even blow that foam, blow that froth off, literally blowing that energy out of your field. And as always, we release energy for the highest good. We're not sending any of this heaviness to anyone else. We're just releasing it. This heaviness will serve somewhere in the universe, so we just release it for the highest good. And maybe by the time you release it, it's so frothy, it doesn't even feel heavy anymore. It's just floating. You can also just let it float off the surface of your body, float out through your field. Make sure you set the intention to release it all the way out of your energetic field. So not just the body, but the fields around the body, which can stretch out quite far. And then as you're ready, just kind of check in, and you can continue this work. We're going to step into a little bit of sound here, bringing some extra beautiful vibration to help with that awareness, to help with that release. You can move on to another scenario if that felt like it was complete. You can dig deeper into the one you've been working on. You can just work with the hurt in general. Work with the energy and encourage it to lighten, encourage it to release. We're going to do some beautiful sound here to lighten that load. Way, hey, 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 ya, 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 ya. Say, ya, 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 ya. He, ya, way, ya, ya, ya. Ha, ya, ya. Say, ya, 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 oh. Say, ya, 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 oh. Say hi, hi, ho. Say hi, hi, ho. Hey, hi, 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 ho. Say how, how, where how. Hey, hi, 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 ho. Say hi, how, how. Say hi, hi, how. Say hi, 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 how. Hi how, hi how. Allowing that work to slowly resolve here, allowing yourself to come to rest if you've been moving. And remember, you can come back to this anytime you like. You can repeat this for all of those little stories you've been telling yourself, all those little hurts that you've held on to for whatever reason. The reason doesn't matter. But the lightness you will experience when you can release those hurts is absolutely worth the work of the excavation. Uncovering them, perhaps having to look at them again, and even maybe having to relive a little bit of that hurt as that purulent material, as that infection, that festering hurt releases. It can be really uncomfortable, but it can also be a huge relief to let go of that cancerous energy that's been sitting, that's been festering, that's been weighing us down. Lightening that load, lightening the load on the body physically, lightening the energetic field, and letting that emotional aspect begin to truly heal. As you're ready, take a few nice deep breaths. You can use that oxytocin breath if it feels good. Maybe go back to doing a little bit of gentle movement, just moving any of the rest of that energy out of the system. And repeat after me out loud if possible. I am fully present in my body. I am present in my body, and I am willing to acknowledge that I've been holding on to hurt. I am present in my body, and I am willing to release the hurt I've been holding on to. I am fully present in my body, and I deserve to let go of my hurt. I deserve lightness and joy, and I claim that now. Sat Nam. The truth of your identity is that you have all facets of being within you, and there's no need to be scared of any of them. Letting yourself see that hurt is what allows you to finally let it heal in a real way, so that you can move on in a lighter and more joyful way. As you're ready, take one more nice deep breath. If you're in a safe space and you'd like to drift off to sleep, you can allow yourself to do that. If you're coming back to the rest of your day or evening, do a little bit more movement. Maybe take 1 or 2 more deep breaths, and as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Have a light rest of your week, and I will see you next week for Wind Down Wednesdays.